All right, everyone, welcome and good evening. Welcome to the Hyperledger Toronto Meetups Group June 30th event. I hope everyone is safe and have been able to enjoy the warm summer weather and ready for Canada Day tomorrow. My name is László Sándor, and I'm one of the co-organizers of this meetup group. And I have with me Jonathan and Curran, who helps me to manage this event as well. This is our second event of the month, and with that, I think we are one of the most active group in the Hyperledger community, and I'm really proud of that. At the beginning of June, we had a session on Hyperledger Fabric for specialized marketplaces, and we are already planning on planning the next session for the second part of July. I hope you will be able to join. Please keep checking our meetup website. For today's topic, and presenter was invited to respond to you guys, or members' request based on the survey what we ran at the end of last year, where many of you showed interest in decentralized identity and the Hyperledger Indy project. Our presenter today, who I met a few months ago in Phoenix, Arizona, when we had the Hyperledger Global Forum, which was an amazing event, according to me. I met a lot of active members of the community, amazing presenters, great presentations. I encourage you all to check out the YouTube channels where all these presentations available. And one of the sessions which I was the most proud of was actually with Stephen Curran. And now we have him presenting today, and he's from Cloud Compass Computing. He's also a software development and DevOps veteran who dove full on into the identity on blockchain world in 2017. Working with the government of British Columbia, Stephen has helped define, build and launch the Verifiable Organization Network, which is a production instance of Hyperledger Indy and Aries that makes public information about organizations in BC available in form of verifiable credentials. Stephen is a regular contributor in the Indy and Aries communities, facilitating collaborations and driving interoperability. He is also a co-author on Hyperledger edX course on Indy and Aries and Ursa, also Hyperledger Technical Ambassador and member of the Sovereign Foundation's Technical Governance Board. Before just giving it over to Stephen, I'd like to remind all of you to please, if you have a question, use the Q&A function at the Zoom. I believe it's at the bottom of the window, or there is a Q&A button. You can pose your questions, and at the end we will have some time reserved for answering those. And Stephen is nice to provide us the slides, so we will post a URL link on the meetup site after the event. So having that said, please welcome Stephen Curran. Stephen, please take it away.
All right. You can hear me?
I certainly can.
And can you stop sharing, please? And I'll jump in. There we go. All right. Whoops, that's the wrong button. Okay, I'm going to share my whole screen, so hopefully we'll get a demo going. So thank you. I'm glad to be here. Okay, whoops, I wanted to get into present mode, so let me go into present mode, make sure you guys can see the screen, and we'll go from there. Look good?
Yeah.
All right, economy scale digital trust. Nice bold statement to begin with that, you know, controversial as can be, you know, it's in red and everything. Trust is broken on the internet. Not actually controversial at all. Everyone knows that. Everyone feels that every day. This 1993, this New Yorker cartoon was published, and it's still pretty much the same today. 27 odd years later, it's still used on every trust and verifiable credentials slide deck there is. So today, would you buy a house based solely on the information provided you electronically from the seller? Not from others around the seller, but the seller themselves. Applying to college, would a university admit a student just based on the information that the student sent them? Given, you know, all of the fun they had last year with bribery and so on in getting into universities, yeah, probably they're not going to trust the student. And we've all received these. Would you help out a Nigerian prince moving $30 million for a 30% commission? It's a good deal, but yeah, today's technology, you probably wouldn't do it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. These relate to 3 projects in Hyperledger. Indy is probably the best known of them. It is a top level, if you will, in Hyperledger in that it is a blockchain itself. Aries is related to it, and I'll talk about how the relationship comes about. And then Ursa is the cryptography that is the basis of the other 2 projects. And so again, I'll put those all in context as I go through this. There's another Linux Foundation organization, another foundation, yes, the 3rd foundation we talked about. So Trust Over IP is a new foundation that just started in March that is looking at all of this. And I'll talk about the Trust Over IP stack as we go through this, but it is another place where somewhat broader than just the Indy and Aries parts of it, which is the technical part of it. Trust Over IP goes into further places to enable trust in the internet. And again, I'm going to go further into that. But to start on the conversation, I'll begin with the paper credential model. And I put out the dates when it was most used. 450 BC, a Persian king gave a guy named Nehemiah a paper credential, a piece of paper that he signed, the king signed, to grant him safe passage across the lands. He was traveling across Persia and he needed to be safe. And so the king gave him a note and signed it and handed it over. And that was the first known use of a paper credential. We put in a deadline here of 1970 where paper credentials began their downward spiral. And that's basically when printers became readily available in the hands of people. First at companies where you could get a hold of and use the company printer, and then personal printers that you could use. And that made the ability to use paper credentials as they had been used all that time, it began to drop because people could make their own credentials. So let's talk about what the paper credential model is. So you're familiar with it. I'm just going to recount it so that you're thinking about it while we go through the rest of it. In a paper credential model, the issuer has some information about the subject. Could be a driver's license, it could be a passport. Those are very formal ones. In governments all over the place, permits and licenses are credentials. Universities give credentials to students when they graduate. Often used in banks and things is your address. So a credential could even be just simply a utility bill that you take somewhere and show somebody. Those are given to the holder. The holder can do whatever they want with them and uses them with verifiers independent of the issuer. So one of the key things here is that the paper credential is handed over, and then the holder is in control of it, and they can use it wherever they want. They give it to a verifier, a bank, to say, oh yes, look, this is my ID for the government. This is my driver's license. This is my address because BC Hydro says it's my address. You can see this piece of paper that I've got that's got my name and my address on it. So that's the paper credential model. The proof given in a paper credential model is who issued the credential. Somewhere on the credential, there's a thing that says, issued by the province of British Columbia or the province of Ontario or the government of Canada. There's something that binds the credential to the person that's handing it over to you. So a picture on it, the name of the person on the utility bill, something like that. And then the fact that the claims are unchanged. Now this is where, you know, printers get into the way and Photoshop gets into the way. You know, if I have to prove my address by showing a BC Hydro bill, that's going to take me at least 15 or 20 seconds in Photoshop, plus the time it takes for the printer to print out the piece of paper that I want to prove that I live at whatever address I want to live at. So the fact that the claims are unchanged becomes a thing that the verifier has to determine. They have to be able to look at the document and be experts in forgery detection and so on. What's implied once you do that is, though, trust. And trust is an important term here because it's who are you trusting? You actually are not necessarily trusting the holder themselves. You are somewhat trusting them that they presented it, and probably the claims are unchanged piece of it is a trust of the holder, but more you're trusting who issued the credential. Under what authority do they have to issue credentials? So we can look at it like this. There's sort of two parts to in-person trust. There's the technology. Does the document look legitimate? Does it have what all the other, you know, passports have and make it look like it's real? Is it, you know, these days, you know, all the documents, they might have embedded chips and things like that. Those are the technology pieces. A piece of money is a credential, by the way. It's another thing that has all sorts of fancy technology in the printing of it. So there's a technology base to whether you trust the credential. And then there's a governance base. What value do you get from trusting where it is? So, you know, the money piece, Bank of Canada issues it. Everyone knows that the Bank of Canada is, I don't know, the government. So, you know, it's trustworthy. As long as I don't think this is a forgery, I can trust that if I get $20, I can take it to the bank and get it cashed in, or I can take it to, I don't know, wherever. I can pay the government with it and things like that. All of that represents the governance of the issuer, and then what that allows you to do. So things like a driver's license comes from the province of British Columbia. Their authority comes from legislation. It allows them to do that. We work a lot with BC registries on organizations. BC registries is a thing which registers companies and organizations, partnerships, and so on. Their authority comes from legislation again. The government says, BC registries, your job is to register every organization in the province. And if you say it's a company, it's a company. And if you say it's not, then it isn't. And until BC registry says, oh yeah, your organization, it's registered, it's not registered. It doesn't have a legal standing, if you will. So in-person trust, a combination of technology and governance. So what about a digital credentials model? What does it change when we are presenting data over the internet? In the model we've had up till now, the way we present the data is we type it into a box on the screen, we type it in ourselves, we fill in the data, and then due diligence is done by the verifier to figure out if that's real. But the digital credentials model, it changes that because it maps directly onto what the paper credential model is, which is an issuer presents the credential to the holder. The holder holds onto it and can use it any way they want. And then they present it to the verifier. And what we want to do in doing that is we don't want to have the verifier going back to the issuer to find out if the information is right. Every time you go to the liquor store and you take out your phone and prove your age, you don't want the liquor store then going back and saying, hey, government, is this person really this age? And having them confirm it. We want to continue with that paper credential model where it's independent of the issuer, the verification process. The way we do that is we use the blockchain. And so we'll talk about where the blockchain comes in. What isn't done is the data goes on the blockchain. So I always like to emphasize that, and I'll emphasize it about 4 more times as I go through this. The data is still given to you on a credential, the equivalent to, the issuance of a driver's license or whatever. What goes on to the blockchain is cryptographic material necessary to prove the components of what we want to prove with credential, which is who issued the credential, who was it issued to, have the claims been unchanged, and because we can do this in real time, we can also same 3 things that we test in the paper credential model, we test in the digital credential model, and then we add this 4th. The nice thing here is that using cryptography, those things that we prove 1, 2, 3, and 4 are as long as we trust the underlying cryptography, those are rock solid. There's none of this trying to guess if the license that I was handed by this student who goes to the university is a real one or one that they bought off the internet. I actually can look at all of these cryptographically and know that these are true. What remains, though, is does the verifier trust the issuer? So that trust model comes into place. This use of digital credentials really takes out of whether you trust the holder or not. You can totally trust the holder because all of the cryptography says that what the holder is presenting is absolutely true. The challenge becomes, do you trust the issuer? Under what authority does that issuer issue a credential to the holder? Any questions at this point? We doing okay in chat or anything? All right. So I'm going to demonstrate what this looks like. This is where we get the fun. So I've got an app on here that in theory should, that in theory should display on the screen. So let me give it a try to make sure we can see this.
Steven, there is one question. Because you invited people to ask it away. Do you want to get to it now, or you want to wait until the end?
Oh, I'm happy to take questions anytime.
Okay, so I see Peter Danko. If you want to type your question in, either probably into the chat, then you can go ahead.
And I'm having lots of fun here because this is the point where I wondered whether it should work, I think. But go ahead with the question. Come on. I'm dying here.
So I see a few lines you typed, Peter, but I'm not sure what's the question. He said, trust issuer with EIDAS in Europe. I'm not sure if it's the question or...
I think the EIDAS, in my mind, would be an issuer of a digital credential, and it would have a governance framework and authority that would allow verifiers to trust it. Sorry, I'm trying one more thing.
Yeah.
Come on. Yes, it showed up. Good. Okay. Can we see that?
Yep, we can. Awesome.
I'm going to do that. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do in this demo is I'm going to show sort of a wallet, which is an app I can run on my phone. I'm going to show an issuer that's going to verify my email address. It's going to give me a credential based on that, and then I'm going to use that credential at another site to verify my identity. And okay, it just spun around. That's all. It's going to keep moving on me. Okay, I'll start with the email verification. So this is a service British Columbia runs in the I've got a link to how you can run this demo yourself, download the mobile app, and so on. So the service works like you would expect an email verification service. I start it up, I submit my email address, and it sends me an email that I'm going to use to pop up another screen which demonstrates that I have control over my email address. So I come over here and you get to see my email. And I haven't got the new one yet, so I'll just wait a sec. There we go. So I open up my email. And I've got a link in it that just says, so it looks like a typical prove you own your own email address. So I click on that, and it's going to take me back to the same email verification service, but this time I've got a verification code up, a QR code. So now I'm going to go back to my there we go. We can see my cell phone again. So I'm going to go to an app called Trinsic, which is a wallet. Whoops. That runs. So I'm spinning up the Trinsic wallet. And all I've done is initialized it, installed it, and initialized it. So I don't have any credentials, but I'm going to scan a code. It's going to ask me to do that. And I'm going to spin, and I'm going to, whoops.
So just to explain what we are seeing here, Stephen, the British Columbian government would enable a service where a citizen can go and enter their email address.
Yeah, so, okay, I'm back online. All right, so what's happened here is British Columbia runs this service, and it basically says, enter your email address, and then when you click the link in your email, it comes back to here, shows you this. You go to a wallet like this. Oh man, I am just not having fun. I just lost the screen it was on. I'm going to scan it one more time and we'll try that once more. There we go. So I've got an accept option. So what it's doing is saying, hey, do you want to connect to this service so we can offer you a credential? So I'm going to accept that. So it's accepted it. And then I'm going to wait for a second, and it's going to offer me a credential. So it's saying, hey, this is the email verification service, and I'm going to offer you a credential that because you've proven you control this email address. Now, think of this as something like what would happen if you went to your driver's license bureau. You would prove who you are, and then the driver's license bureau would offer you a credential that you could accept. So it's the same sort of scenario I'm trying to simulate here. In this case, the authorization is very light. You're just proving you own the email address. And so this is saying, hey, we'll give you a credential, and it's got your email address on it and the time you've got it. And so I have the option of accepting it, so I'm going to accept this credential.
So Stephen, if this service would be actually, as you mentioned, a driver license, and if this British Columbian service would be, issuing you a digital version of the driver license, then going through the same process, what you just presented with the email, at the end in my wallet, there would be a digital driver license, what I can bring to my bank or present it to whoever needs me for verifying my identity. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's exactly right. Okay. I'm going to bump my size here. Yeah. So, and we've got proof of concepts in British Columbia that do exactly that. BC has a digital, digitally enabled driver's license program. And so we offer sort of an OAuth version, I think it is, of driver's license. We actually use that to prove who we are, and then we can get a digital credential like this. So I now have in my wallet a email verification service credential. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this second website that you can see. I'm going to connect to it. And what you're going to see is, hey, look at that, another one of these things. So I will scan the code. And this time I've connected. Again, this service now wants to connect me. So this is what's called a verifier. So this is the verifier side. So what it's going to do is it's going to get me to verify my email address. And then once it has, it's going to offer me a credential to say that I attended a conference in this case. So in this case now, what it's doing, it says, I've received a request for proof of credentials. So it's asking me for proof of my verified email address. And it's asking me to expose, to hand over that information. So this is in the old school way, I would type this in and then they would have to figure out if they could trust that email address. They'd have to do something with it. In this way, because they trust the issuer, the email verification service in this case, which, I don't know how much you would trust that, but I'm able to present my credential. Now that's gone off and communicated back to this service, and this service is now going to offer me a credential. So now it's going to get me to type in some information. In this case, it's just self-attested information, and it's going to say I went to Hyperledger Global Forum. So this is, again, just an example. I'm going to submit that. But it tended to show, the interface, the interchange that's going to happen between a issuer, the holder being the wallet, and then a verifier. So now and I timed out. So the wallet has now been offered another credential. So this service verified my email address, asked me who I was and what conference I attended, and then offered me another credential that I attended this conference. And so now it's got the information it pulled from the email address plus the information I entered, and I can accept that credential and I could use it. That was one of the worst demos I've ever done of this, but hopefully it got the point across of this model of the equivalent to paper credential. An issuer issues to a holder. The holder then can present that information to a verifier, and the verifier, assuming they know who the issuer is or can find out who the issuer is, and then decides if they can trust that issuer, they offer some sort of service to the person, whatever the business utility is around that. As I say, it didn't flow very well, but we'll go with that.
I think it was understandable. Just a quick question, Stephen.
Yeah.
I assume there will be an opportunity or possibility to have multiple attributes to an ID, and if
absolutely,
okay, yeah,
yeah. So a credential, it consists of multiple claims. The idea here that we're trying to achieve is that you get an identity credential from the BC government in the context of, say, a services card or a driver's license. But another use case that we have that we're actually implementing right now is the Ministry of Justice has a system that they only want lawyers to be able to use. How do you prove you're a lawyer? One way to do that is you get a membership card from the Law Society of British Columbia. What if the Law Society of British Columbia gave you a credential that said, yes, you are a fine, upstanding member, you're a lawyer, and then you then can go to this government system and prove you're a lawyer, and nobody else, people that are not lawyers, would not be issued that credential, would not be able to use it. What it allows is anyone can be an issuer, and if people trust them, their credentials can be used. So it allows a much finer grained sense of what identity is in the context that's important. In a government service you're trying to obtain, maybe your government ID is important, but if you're a doctor, the health system would care that what are your credentials as a doctor. If you're signing plans for buildings, the planner would want to know that you're an engineer. So all sorts of context come out where you can prove that you're a member of whatever group it is you want. Further, all of these membership cards are sitting in your wallet, just like your paper ones are, and you can choose when to present them and when not to present them. And we'll get into this in a bit, what parts of the credential you want to present. So that's the power of this model. It really changes how you would go about doing these transactions and how you would accept the data as a verifier.
Can you elaborate on a little bit where the data actually is stored and what would happen if someone's wallet or phone would be stolen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the credentials themselves are in the wallet. So that's what I demonstrated there. So to be clear, the credentials don't go to the blockchain. They aren't held by the issuer until the holder asks them to be checked, which is the Facebook model, the login with Facebook. Those models are not used. The literal credential goes into here. It's encrypted, it's signed, and it's controlled by the holder. The protections on its use are all of the phone protections, biometric protection to access the wallet, so your fingerprint checking or whatever is necessary. So that's the control there. The part of the protection of privacy is you now control who you're going to share them with. Because the data can be trusted, the relying parties, the people that are asking for your credentials, don't have to over-collect data about you. They can just collect what they need, knowing that they can trust what you provide. If you're able to provide it, if you're able to provide proof that you're a citizen of British Columbia because you have a card, or a resident of British Columbia because you have a card, they don't need to know anything else about you. They just need to know that, if that's what the business case is. So hopefully that answers where the data is. It's in your wallet, and then you're proving it.
Yeah, it does. A related question to that is, what happens if the phone is stolen or?
Yeah. So backups are necessary. So there's work going on with like how you back it up. Trinsic allows you to back it up, and then what you do in the backup, for those familiar with blockchain, it's similar to like other methods, which is you want to put the backup somewhere encrypted, and then you want the key to the backup put somewhere else. Keep those two apart until you need to restore something. But the wallet can be restored in different ways. No one would be able to use the wallet without access to the keys that you have. So the keys are high security level. They are, you can't brute force break the keys and things like that. They're all high entropy keys that can't be broken with brute force attacks. But yes, there is a need to have the wallet backed up. So part of the responsibility of the wallet app is to make sure that you have ways of recovering it. And there's various ways that are being created and defined for how that happens. But basically it's like a Bitcoin wallet. You need to have the key, and you need to keep that safe and away from your backup of the wallet, so that when you go to restore them, you bring the two together and you can restore the wallet.
See.
There's another link that I'm going to provide here, which talks about one of the things we're doing in BC is a possible concept for COVID-19 tracking. And basically it allows people to create a physical access point by using credentials. It kind of replaces the visitor's record book that you see here on the screen that people have used for years. This is really not going to cut it if you're trying to prove that a person is an essential worker, that they're supposed to be at a care home, for example, and they have a testing status, a COVID-19 testing status, something like that. So that's what this Safe Entry BC is about, and it's linked in there. So you can give that a try. It takes you through, it has a background on what we're thinking of and how you would use it, and then a number of sites you can use to walk through all of the same sort of things that I did. So all of these work. You're welcome to try. Yeah, there you go. So what I'd like to now come back to, so hopefully that's it for the demos, and as I say, a little rough, but hopefully you got the point. What I wanted to come back with is this is not just about the technology, this is about the human side, and I've emphasized that a few times through this. There's technical trust, which is what I'm showing on the screen here, which is, an issuer provides some credential based on some technology, whether that be, paper or plastic or a digital credential. And then there's a way to display the document to a verifier, and the trust flows from the issuer. The way that happens is often through what's called a governance framework. A governance framework sort of says, okay, verifier, here's why you can trust the issuer. When it's some of these are, we just understand it because it's like the government. You can trust a $20 bill that is real because it's got Bank of Canada on it, and you trust Bank of Canada because they can print money anytime they want. And you can trust a credit card a credit card is another form of a governance authority. Millions of people, billions of people have credit cards, millions of merchants accept them, money flows as a result of this. But it's because there's a governance framework involved that says, okay, if you follow the rules as a holder of a card, you pay your bill on a regular basis and you stay within the limits we set and so on, will allow you to use that credit card. And as a merchant, as long as you follow the rules and you don't abuse the card, we'll make sure we pay you on a regular basis for the money you collected via credit card. So it's all based on a governance authority, and all the participants are agreeing to a set of rules and following it. That's what a governance framework is, and that's kind of where this, how all of this works in a digital scale. The trust over IP stack is, and I mentioned the Trust over IP Foundation. This is the organization that is trying to formalize what both the technology stack looks like on the right side there, and then the governance stack looks like on the left. So those are the two pieces that have to come together to enable this trust. You've got the technology piece, the blockchain at the bottom, the agents, it's showing here both are agents that are mobile, but I showed you agents, a mobile wallet plus an enterprise agent that is an issuer and a verifier. Those are communicating across a trusted channel. Next layer up, data exchange protocols, where you're doing these issuing credentials, holding credentials, and verifying credentials. So all of that triangle that we've talked about. And then on top of that, you've got apps that are running these. You've got an app that operates off a conference and issues I attended this conference credential. All sorts of things that allow you to do this. So the Law Society use case is a digital trust ecosystem between the Law Society, the lawyers, the Ministry of Justice, but we can extend that out. Lawyers do land sales. Well, the land title company can use these. Banks can use these to trust that a lawyer is in good standing and therefore can have a trust account and so on. On the other side, these frameworks, at each level of these, you've got to have some sort of potentially legal agreement, but some sort of coordination between all of the parties that participate at each level of the governance. And that's what trust over IP is about. As we've seen, verifiable credentials reside, they're cryptographically signed, held on usually often on a smartphone when they're held by people, and the data is not on a blockchain. Indy contains some pretty powerful pieces, which are kind of cool. They're called zero knowledge proofs. And a zero knowledge proof is basically saying, I can prove something. Without telling you, I can prove I know something without telling you what that basic information is. And so I'll give an example of that. But there's a couple of ways that it's used. One is that you can prove a credential without a unique identifier for yourself. So I can prove that I have a BC card without proving exactly who I am, because if that doesn't matter for the use case, you don't need to know that. So you don't need to know this unique identifier for me, so that which can constrain the correlation economy, the surveillance economy that we're living in right now. Selective disclosure means that when I present a credential, I don't have to expose all of the information in the credential. I only have to expose what is necessary for this business case. So when I go to a bar, there's no need for them to know my home address, my phone number, what color my eyes are, things like that. In a paper one, I can't avoid it because it's all on the piece of paper. But in a driver's license, on an online use case, I can do this. So when I'm presenting this in person, I would present that, who issued the credential, maybe a picture of me so that binds it to me, but I don't have to expose any other information. And the second piece are called predicate proofs. And this is a version of a zero knowledge proof. So I can prove that I'm older than a certain age, I'm older than 19, but I don't have, based on my date of birth, which is in the credential, but I don't have to expose my date of birth. So that's another powerful capability that's part of Indy, Hyperledger Indy's capabilities. Provable digitally signed data, that's what a verifiable credential is. Tricky word, the tricky part is provable. And we want to prove it not by going to ask the issuer, is this all correct? We want to do this independent. And so the way we do that is we use a blockchain. So the blockchain holds basically the public keys that are used to sign the various credentials. That's one part of it. It also holds the metadata about the credentials themselves, the names of the fields and so on. And it also contains a pointer back, the DID, the decentralized identifier of the issuer. And that's the mechanism that allows me to know who issued the credential. So I can know with certainty who issued it. I do have to figure out who that identifier represents. And that's another part of the story. But I know all of those things based on just getting information from the blockchain independent of the issuer. Here's a bunch of use case. I've talked about most of these. The two that I'll highlight, easy, reliable data integration through the citizen and with consent. So one of the challenges of integrations across the world, suppose is that each participant has to somehow be identified and integrate in some way to collect data. So inside the government, for example, we have this digital identity program, and the data on the services card in British Columbia is contained in a special service that holds digital identity information about citizens. The various parts of the government can request access to that data, and they go through a long process of figuring out whether they're allowed to do it, what is the privacy impact on the citizen, how they can correlate or not correlate the data across other programs and things like that. So there's a lot of work done to ensure that the data is used in a reliable way. That plane does not scale to the entire economy. There's no way we could do that same integration with every bank and every business and every employer across the province, let alone across the world. But if we can give the citizen the data, just like we give them a paper one, and let them decide how to share that data and where to use it, that does scale to the internet. That does scale to the digital economy. So that's really good. Selective disclosure improves privacy. You don't have to expose all the information. You just have to prove whatever is necessary for the business case. Less data collection. A lot of what we do in systems is we collect a bunch of data and then assess it as a group to see if we trust, if we can mitigate the risk of granting some service to somebody. We're trading, their information that we get to make sure they are who they say they are, and then we make decisions on whether we can grant them a service. So that's what a bank does with the KYC. They collect a bunch of information to make sure you're trustworthy and then grant that. If they can collect less data because they can actually trust what you tell them without having to do due diligence, that's a win for everybody. And then the second one I wanted to go, hacked data becomes worthless. Right now, when you have to submit your social insurance number, you type it into a form. And the original idea was because only you would know your social insurance number, nobody else would. Nobody could be impersonating you. And of course, that's completely bogus. But if the only way a verifier would accept your social insurance number is via a credential issued by Services Canada, then a hacked social insurance number, an exposed one, is worthless. You can't use it if nobody will accept it because it's not actually signed, trusted data. This is the organizations that are involved in standardizing this technology, W3C and DIF, and obviously Hyperledger. Trust over IP Foundation is now a big part of this, and so I added that to this screen. This is the Hyperledger piece of this. This is the greenhouse from the Hyperledger, and it shows where the Indy is, which is, it is a blockchain. It is not like Fabric or Grid as or not Grid, but Fabric or Sawtooth as a general purpose smart contract, but rather it is specifically for storing the information necessary to prove credentials. And then Aries and Ursa are down here. And just to give a little more context, if we look at this technology stack, Indy is a DID utility. It's a place where the blockchain elements are stored. And then Indy also provides the verifiable credential model that exists at layer 3. So that's Indy. Aries is basically the wallet, is the wallet level, the agent level that allows you to communicate between trusted parties. So it allows you to establish peer-to-peer communication between agents that are implemented in Aries, and then lets you, on top of that, run protocols to do things like issue a credential, which is a protocol, verify a credential, that's another protocol, establish a connection between two wallets, that's a protocol, send messages between wallets, that's another protocol. So there's a number of protocols that execute on top of this peer-to-peer communication channel, this secure end-to-end encrypted communication channel that's established between the participants, the agents. And then, so as a result of its role in layers 2 and 3, from a downwards perspective, Aries can talk to an Indy DID ledger, DID utility, the blockchain part of it, and other ones. And then, in addition to the protocols for exchanging credentials, Aries can execute and define and execute many more credentials. So at a layer 3. So what you build on top of Aries is the applications, and that's what we're doing right now in British Columbia, and that we provide all sorts of services, which is you can do lots with it, lots of protocols. And then Ursa is the cryptography behind both of these. So there's all sorts of cryptography or encryption, So that end-to-end encryption for messaging, the signatures on the credentials, the proving of the signatures on the credentials, and so on. All of that is based on cryptography. The zero knowledge proof work is all based on cryptography inside Ursa. Resources, I throw these out there because like I wrote these courses. So there's a couple of edX courses. 72 is sort of a business level introduction and gets a little bit into the technology. If you are interested in developing on this technology, 73 is a course for a developer and becoming an Aries developer.
That's great.
And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephen. I have a question, and also we captured a couple of from the audience.
Okay. Yeah.
If we go back to, you don't have to go back to the slides, but just in terms of topic, going back to, you know, the hacked data becomes unusable. Is there a way for the credential owner or the identity owner, or an individual, in case they, you know, they have their phone lost or they've been compromised one or the other way, to notify the issuer that, hey, my credentials has been compromised. Please, I don't know, change the credentials or update it, or like, what's the, if you can walk us through, or just...
Yeah, so with the credential, I mentioned revocation is a possibility. So revocation is often seen as you know, oh, my driver's license has been rescinded. I had, you know, points taken off, and so my driver's license has been revoked. That's one method, but actually, if you just change the data on a credential, you can revoke it. If a citizen has a credential that has, you know, their access to that credential has been compromised, that credential can be revoked. When a credential is revoked, that's an operation done to the blockchain, so it occurs independent. The issuer can do it at any time. And then when the credential goes to be verified, the verifier would determine that the credential has been revoked. So that's probably the number one way. As well, I mean, the big thing here is that instead of all of this data being in a central database, and when you hack it, you get everybody's, now the data is all chopped up and distributed amongst, you know, all of the people. As one person told me, it was quite interesting when he heard that we've turned the hackers towards the 1% or the 0.1% of society, because they're the real money, the target value. Because now you're actually trying to hack an individual, as opposed to give me an entire database and I can make I can make money on volume. You've got no volume in being able to break into these. So now it becomes, you're actually potentially, you know, targeting an individual. But there's lots of protections you've got there. You've got physical protection of the device and things like that.
In theory, what would it really take to compromise the security, what Indy can provide?
So Indy does all of the, the cryptography is all modern cryptography, let's say.
Yeah.
The entire security of the wallet is actually based on the OS platform. What security has been built into the platform that prevents people from getting it? You've heard the discussions about Apple trying to, or the FBI trying to force Apple to disclose how to access the system or whatever, or things like that. I mean, for example, like the messaging that I've talked about, that is end-to-end encryption. So you would not be able to, get in the middle of that, see the data as it crosses the internet and be able to decrypt it in any way, because the only keys that are available to access it are on this device and the device I'm talking to. There's no keys or anything, backdoors or anything that would be available anywhere else. So privacy is pretty solidly available.
I see. And one of the member or viewer question is that, and I think you covered it, but I would like to reiterate that. So in some cases, for instance, in Europe or in Slovakia, where I believe he's writing from, if you present your plastic ID to enter a casino, which has a chip, they will actually have potentially access to all the data which is stored on the card, which don't necessarily have rightful access to it, because they just need to validate your your date of birth or your age. And same as different organizations, like would this system allow permission-based access to different authorities?
Very quick answer to that is absolutely not, because you actually are messaging back and forth with the two parties. Nobody is getting access to your system. They are sending a message saying, hey, can you prove these credentials? They're sending you a message, you're constructing a message and then sending it back to them. So there's no access they have physically to your device. The most they can do is send you requests for information. And then the protocols allow you, the protocols enable control over how the answers come back to the user. So a wallet can have a user interface like I demonstrated earlier that says, hey, this person is asking for, or this other entity is asking for information. Do you want to share it? Yes or no? So you have full control over it. And in fact, you can prove things without actually exposing the data. And if that's okay with the verifier, you don't even have to expose the data. So all of that control is way more in this case. So they're not accessing anything on your system. They're not accessing the chip or anything like that.
Cool. Another question is, how can trust over IP change the way people can do business or come to an agreement? For instance, not having to be in person to sign a document, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what enables that. It allows you to do digital transactions beyond just buying things that are trusted because they know your credit card and they know where they're shipping the stuff to. That's basically why that's trusted. So there's enough mitigation there. But tons of high value transactions become possible because you can have a way to actually trust the identity or the information being provided by the other party. You're not necessarily, as I say, trusting the other party, you're trusting the issuer to the other party. And whatever that's needed to mitigate the risk of the transaction you're trying to accomplish. As I say, it's basically the equivalent of when you go to do some transaction, you type in a bunch of information on the screen and it's just text and you could type anything you wanted. With a credential, you cannot do that. You can only present the credentials you have. They are signed by the issuer, so there's no way you could have adjusted them in any way in between. So all the cryptography is coming to bear onto that, and that enables those higher level transactions to occur on the internet.
So basically,
selling houses and so on.
If I'm given a driver license or a personal identification card, or like a digital version as you presented, and I show up in the liquor store would ask the issuer if my age is appropriate to buy alcohol, and the issuer would ask me, or the system would ask me, if I want to share the data with the liquor store.
No. So
okay.
I just want to make sure you're very clear. The liquor store is the verifier. They would ask me, the holder, to provide the information.
Yes.
They would not ask the issuer being the government of British Columbia. They would not have anything to do with that.
Sorry. Yeah,
they would only ask me. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was wrong. Okay. Has there been any testing or any theories explored on possibly compromise or
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's something in the groups we talk about all the time is what are, every time we propose a protocol when we change the cryptography, anything like that, there's a full vetting of, okay, what's the risk involved? What are the attack vectors? No doubt there will be more, but that is a number one priority all the way through the process, because we would like to make this as as a way to trust on the internet, and to do that, the attack vectors have to be so low. I mean, this is part of why, if you attack a single person, well, that there's not a lot of value to it. It's really hard to do. You've got to get physical access and things like this. And when you've done it, you've hacked one person. You haven't hacked thousands or hundreds of thousands. You've hacked one. Now you move on to the next. There's no value in doing it. That's what we're trying to do.
I see. And
I just saw a comment in there. I gotta say, simply as from 30 years, they will use PGP keys. This is actually the basis. It's the same model as PGP, but PGP could never figure out how to reliably distribute the public keys. The blockchain is the magic that allows you to reliably publish the public keys necessary for it. But that person, I think it's Peter, just nailed it exactly, which is it's exactly the theory that PGP was trying to do, but they didn't have blockchain capabilities back then. That's actually the fundamental difference.
Let me see if there's any other or additional questions.
See the question there on no. So the answer about the liquor shop will verify the information with the government. They only verify it with the holder's wallet. But the holder's wallet had to have received it from the government. So when they verify the data, they can't fake the ID because they can't fake issuing it from the government. The liquor store will, in addition to checking, the data hasn't been changed, they will check to see who issued this. And they're going to know what the government of British Columbia's ID is for issuing credentials. And if they see that credential was issued by someone else, like I issued it to myself, they would immediately recognize that. So there's no way to get around it in that way.
That's
not a risk.
Data is stored.
What's that?
Sorry, where the actual data is stored and what data is stored on the blockchain itself.
Okay, so the data that's stored on the phone is the actual credential.
Okay.
The what goes on the blockchain is the identifier for the issuer, and that is also here. So when I present a proof, it tells the verifier who issued the credential, the identifier of that, and then that information, the identifier is on the blockchain, and then all of the claims, all of the data elements of the credential are signed. All of the public keys to verify the signature are all on the blockchain. So, for example, in one of our projects, we've issued 2.5 million credentials. That was all done with 3 transactions on the blockchain. So there's only 3 transactions on the blockchain, 2.5 million credentials. All of those credentials are in a wallet, and they all are secured by the cryptography referenced in those 3 blockchain transactions. So nothing about a credential, an individual credential, goes on the blockchain. The only thing that goes is the keys necessary to verify the data within the credential.
I see. All right, Stephen, just to be mindful about the time, this is 7:05. I think we had a very interesting presentation and I learned a lot, especially how to identify myself at the liquor store. I'd like to thank you once again to coming on board and
I hope it was helpful
about this important aspect of the Hyperledger projects and efforts. Also, I especially like to thank to everyone who showed up today. I know it's tempting to be outside in the summer evening, as at least what we have in Toronto, and also tomorrow Canada Day. So
have a great day tomorrow, everyone.
Yes, probably a lot of people are on the highway right now, and trying to get out of the city, if you live in the city. So having that said, thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you for John co-hosting it, and I wish everyone a very happy Canada Day. Hope you will also take off Thursday, Friday, and have a 5 days weekend, how it should be always. And obviously happy Canada Day to you as well, Stephen. And I'm looking forward to how this project develops, and the Trust Over IP Foundation and all this project evolves.
Yeah.
And just looking forward to the next chapter on this.
All right. Have a great one.
All right. Thank you.
Feel free to reach out to anyone. I think my email's in there if anyone's got questions or whatever they would like to follow on for info.
Yeah. We will share the slides with everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.